My wife was cheating on me with her boss and thought I wouldn't find out. When I gathered evidence of the affair, photos and videos, I plastered them all over the house, then sent them to the boss's wife. It started on a Thursday, just a regular workday for James. He had left the office early because his meeting got canceled last minute. No big deal, he thought. More time to relax at home, maybe catch a quick nap before his wife, Charlotte, got back from work. But as he pulled into the driveway, something odd caught his eye. A car was already in the garage. It wasn't Charlotte's. His heart immediately dropped, a sinking feeling clenching in his chest. He knew every vehicle in the neighborhood. This sleek black Mercedes wasn't one of them. And it certainly wasn't his wife's Toyota. James's mind raced, but he didn't want to jump to conclusions. Maybe Charlotte had a guest over? Maybe it was a surprise or something innocent. But deep down, he knew something was wrong. He crept quietly around to the back door, avoiding the garage entrance. As soon as he got inside, he heard muffled voices coming from upstairs, the master bedroom. He paused in the hallway, barely breathing as he listened. The voices were faint, but it was unmistakable. Charlotte's laugh, her voice, and a man's. Another man in his house, in his bedroom. He felt his blood boil but forced himself to remain calm. He wasn't about to rush in like a madman, only to end up in a fight. He needed to know more. James tiptoed back out, retreating to his car. He needed time to think, to plan. Sitting in his car, heart pounding, James tried to calm himself. He considered storming back inside, confronting her right then and there. But what would that do? Charlotte could deny it, or worse, paint him as paranoid. No, he needed proof, undeniable evidence. He drove to a nearby diner and sat in the parking lot for a while, replaying everything in his head. After a few moments, an idea started to form in his mind. He knew what he needed to do. His plan was simple: gather as much evidence as possible. If she was cheating, he'd make sure it all came crashing down on her and her lover. James had a friend who was a tech-savvy guy, Mason. They had been close since college, and James knew he could trust him. Mason wasn't the type to ask questions, either. He'd help, no problem. Later that evening, James called Mason under the guise of needing help with a security upgrade for the house. It wasn't entirely a lie. He just didn't mention the part about catching his wife cheating. Mason showed up the next day with a box of high-end cameras and microphones, enough to cover every room in the house. "Is everything okay, man?" Mason asked, raising an eyebrow as they started setting up the devices. "Yeah, just want to feel more secure, you know?" James replied, keeping his tone casual. Mason didn't push further. Within an hour, they had the equipment hidden in places even Charlotte wouldn't notice. Tiny cameras in vents, under furniture, and microphones tucked away in corners. For the next week, James watched his wife closely. Every evening, when she came home, everything seemed normal, too normal. They had dinner, watched TV, went to bed. She smiled like nothing was wrong, but James saw her differently now. Every time her phone buzzed, every time she got a text or stepped out of the room to take a call, he felt the anger rise in his chest. Then, 2 days later, the confirmation came. It was a Wednesday afternoon, and James was at work when he got the notification on his phone. Movement detected in the master bedroom. He pulled up the live feed from the hidden camera, and there it was. Charlotte, tangled up with her boss, Liam, the same guy whose car had been in the garage that day. The feed showed them in bed together, laughing, kissing, and talking as if they had no care in the world. The conversation that followed made James sick to his stomach. "We should be more careful," Liam said, lighting a cigarette. Charlotte laughed, rolling over on the bed. "He's clueless. James would never suspect a thing." That was the moment James knew he had to follow through with his plan. They were mocking him, his wife, the woman he'd loved and trusted, and her arrogant boss, thinking they were getting away with it. But James wasn't just going to sit there and let them destroy his life. No, he was going to make them pay. James spent the next few days gathering more footage. He didn't just want one instance. He wanted a mountain of evidence. He recorded every conversation, every text Charlotte sent to Liam. He installed a keystroke logger on her laptop to monitor her emails. Slowly but surely, he built his case. The more he watched, the more disgusted he became. Charlotte and Liam weren't just having an affair. They were planning for a future together. In one of their conversations, Charlotte even mentioned divorce. "I'll leave him soon," she said casually, as if their marriage meant nothing to her. It was a slap in the face. But James wasn't going to let her control how things ended. He was going to end it on his terms. As the days passed, James's plan grew darker. He didn't just want to confront her. James woke up early on the day he had planned for weeks. The day he would reveal everything, and in a way that no one, especially Charlotte, would ever forget. The evidence he had gathered was undeniable. Hidden camera footage, transcripts of conversations, and dozens of text messages between his wife and her boss, Liam. But simply confronting her wasn't enough. He wanted the whole neighborhood to know what she had done. The idea had come to him in a moment of dark inspiration. It wasn't enough to leave her or to expose the affair privately. He needed to humiliate her the way she had humiliated him. So, he began by moving all the furniture from their shared bedroom onto the front lawn. The bed where she had betrayed him, the nightstand where she kept her secrets, the carpet they had picked out together. All of it would be laid bare for everyone to see. He took his time with the arrangements, making sure everything looked perfect. The bed was centered on the lawn, the headboard facing the street so it would catch the eye of every passing car. The table and chairs were placed around it, as if to mimic the cozy interior of a bedroom. Only now it was in full view of anyone who cared to look. On the table, James laid out the final touch. A series of printed photos, high-resolution and unforgiving, showing Charlotte and Liam together in bed. Alongside the photos, James attached a large sign. He had written the words carefully, his hands steady and his anger controlled. "This is the bed where my wife, Charlotte, decided to betray me with her boss." Beneath that, he had printed some of the text between Charlotte and Liam, their intimate plans for the future and their cruel comments about him. He made sure the letters were large and bold, impossible to miss. After everything was arranged, James stood back, surveying the scene. It was exactly as he had imagined. The ultimate display of her betrayal, out in the open, for everyone to witness. New faces on the scene. It wasn't long before the neighbors began to notice. The first to approach was Karen, the busybody who lived across the street. She was in her late 50s, always peeking through her blinds, always curious about everyone else's business. She marched over, her face twisted in a mix of shock and intrigue. "James, what on earth is this?" she asked, her eyes darting between the furniture and the photos. "Is this some kind of joke?" "It's no joke," James replied calmly. "It's exactly what it looks like. Charlotte's been cheating on me with her boss, and I'm making sure the world knows." Karen gasped, her hand flying to her chest. "Oh my God, I had no idea." A few other neighbors began to gather, all drawn by the spectacle unfolding on James's lawn. Tom, who lived 2 houses down, was walking his dog when he saw the display. He stopped in his tracks, staring at the bed, the photos, the sign. "Jesus, man," Tom muttered under his breath. "You really went all out." James nodded, not saying anything more. He didn't need to explain himself to anyone. He just wanted the truth out in the open. By mid-morning, there was a small crowd forming. People slowed their cars as they drove by, some even pulling over to get a better look. Word was spreading quickly, and it wasn't long before Lily, Charlotte's best friend, arrived. She was pale, her hands trembling as she approached James. What are you doing?" she stammered. "This isn't right. You can't just what, Lily?" James cut her off, his voice cold. "Tell the truth? Show everyone who she really is? She did this, not me." Lily's face flushed with anger. "But this is humiliating. You're putting her private life on display for the whole neighborhood to see." James stepped closer, his expression hard. "You think I care about her humiliation after what she did to me? She didn't care when she brought that man into our bed, did she?" Lily opened her mouth to protest, but no words came out. She looked from James to the photos, her eyes filling with tears. She turned away, unable to face the reality of what her friend had done. Charlotte's return. Around noon, James got a text from Charlotte. She was on her way home, completely unaware of what was waiting for her. James stood by the front door, his heart racing as he waited. He had been imagining this moment for weeks, the moment she saw what he had done. The moment her lies were laid bare, he heard her car pull into the driveway, the engine cutting off. There was a long pause, and then the sound of the car door opening. Charlotte must have noticed the bed first, sitting prominently on the lawn. Then the photos. Then the sign. A scream tore through the air. It was a sound James had never heard from her before, raw and full of panic. "James, what the hell is this?" she shrieked, rushing toward the front door. James stayed calm, his arms crossed as he watched her approach. Her face was flushed, her eyes wide with disbelief. She grabbed the photos from the table, staring at them in horror. "Why would you do this?" Charlotte cried, her voice breaking. "This is insane. You're insane." James didn't flinch. "I'm not insane, Charlotte. I'm just done with your lies. I'm done pretending everything's fine while you sneak around with him." Charlotte looked around, as if hoping someone would step in and stop this nightmare. But the crowd had grown silent, watching in uncomfortable fascination. Some took out their phones to record, others whispered to each other, but no one moved to help her. "I can explain," she shouted desperately. "It's not what it looks like." "Oh, really?" James said, his voice dripping with sarcasm. "Because it looks pretty clear to me. You cheated, Charlotte. You betrayed me. And now everyone knows." Tears streamed down her face as she tried to plead with him, but James had heard enough. He turned and walked back inside the house, leaving her standing alone on the lawn, surrounded by the evidence of her infidelity. Consequences. As James sat inside, watching from the window, Charlotte fell to her knees beside the bed. She was sobbing uncontrollably, her hands shaking as she clutched the photos. Several of the neighbors had left by now, but a few remained, still watching the scene unfold. Lily finally stepped forward, kneeling beside her friend. "Come on, Charlotte," she whispered. "Let's go inside." But Charlotte shook her head, still staring at the sign. "I can't believe he did this," she muttered, her voice barely audible through the sobs. Liam arrived not long after. He pulled up in his sleek Mercedes, the same car James had seen in the garage that first day. His face was pale, and as soon as he saw the scene in front of him, he knew there was no talking his way out of this. He hurried over to Charlotte, ignoring the stares from the neighbors. "What the hell is going on?" he demanded. Charlotte didn't answer, just pointed to the sign and the photos. Liam's face went even paler as he realized the full extent of what had happened. "James did this?" he asked, his voice low with disbelief. Charlotte nodded, still crying. "He knows everything, Liam. It's all over." Liam cursed under his breath, running a hand through his hair. "We need to get out of here," he said. "Come on, let's go." But Charlotte didn't move. She was too broken, too overwhelmed by the shame of it all. Liam grabbed her arm, pulling her to her feet. As they walked back toward the car, James stepped out of the house one last time. "Oh, Liam," he called, stopping them in their tracks. "Don't forget this." He tossed a stack of more photos toward them. They scattered across the lawn, fluttering in the wind. Liam glared at him but said nothing, knowing there was nothing left to say. As they drove away, James watched them go, feeling a strange sense of satisfaction wash over him. It wasn't the kind of closure he had imagined, but it was something. Charlotte was gone, and now, everyone knew the truth. James turned back toward the house, closing the door behind him. For the first time in a long while, he felt free. James sat in his lawyer's office, his mind made up. The evidence he had collected, photos, videos, and messages, was more than enough to file for divorce. His attorney, Patrick, was reviewing the documents while James stared at the wall. His thoughts weren't on the legal process itself. They were on what came next. He wasn't just ending his marriage. He was about to destroy everything Charlotte and Liam had built on their lies. Patrick cleared his throat. "With this much evidence, this will be straightforward. Charlotte won't be able to contest anything." James nodded, emotionless. There was no satisfaction in knowing the process would be easy, only cold resolve. He wasn't going to let her walk away from this unscathed. He wasn't just done with his marriage. He was done with the person she had become. The divorce filing was the first step. The second was exposing Liam's betrayal to his own wife. James left the lawyer's office with a thick envelope of evidence. He drove across town to Liam's house, where Liam's wife, Sarah, lived. They had met briefly at a few company events. She seemed nice, kind, even, but now her life was about to change. She had no idea what her husband had been doing behind her back, and James knew he had to tell her. Sarah opened the door, surprised to see him standing there. "James? What brings you here?" He handed her the envelope without saying a word. Her hands trembled as she opened it, her face contorting as she saw the photos of her husband with Charlotte. She flipped through the texts, the evidence undeniable. Her voice broke. I don't understand. How long has this been going on?" "Months," James replied, his tone flat. "I'm sorry you had to find out like this." Tears streamed down her face, and she sat down hard on the couch, her legs giving way beneath her. She stared at the floor, the reality sinking in. Liam had betrayed her, and now the world knew. Sarah's reaction was swift. Within days, she filed for divorce, just as James had. She used the same evidence, photos, texts, and videos, to build her case. Liam's life began to unravel, starting with his marriage. At work, Liam quickly became the subject of rumors. It wasn't long before his affair with Charlotte reached the ears of his superiors. The company had a strict policy against relationships between employees, especially those involving a power imbalance. Liam had crossed a line, and now there were consequences. One morning, he was called into a meeting with Diane, the head of human resources. She informed him that his position was no longer tenable. The company couldn't risk the scandal damaging their reputation. He was given no choice but to resign. Liam walked out of the office, his career in ruins. Back at home, Charlotte's life wasn't faring much better. After James had exposed their affair so publicly, her reputation was destroyed. She couldn't escape the whispers, the stares from neighbors and friends. Everywhere she went, she felt their eyes on her, judging her. Even her closest friends began to distance themselves, uncomfortable with the scandal that now surrounded her. Charlotte lost her job a week after Liam. The company cited unprofessional conduct as the reason for her termination, but everyone knew the real reason. She had become a liability. Her life, once stable and comfortable, was falling apart piece by piece. One night, Charlotte showed up at James's door. Her face was pale, her eyes red from crying. She looked nothing like the confident woman he had married years ago. "Please, James," she begged, her voice shaking. "I'm sorry. I made a horrible mistake. Can we talk about this?" James stared at her, his expression hard. "Talk about what, Charlotte? How you lied to me for months? How you slept with your boss in our home? What exactly is there to talk about?" Tears welled up in her eyes again. "I know I hurt you. I know I've done terrible things, but I lost everything. My job, my friends. I don't even have Liam anymore. I've got nothing left." James crossed his arms, unmoved. "You should have thought about that before you decided to cheat on me. You made your choices, Charlotte. Now you're dealing with the consequences." She broke down, sobbing uncontrollably. "I don't know what to do anymore. I'm so sorry, James. I'll do anything to make it up to you. Please, just don't throw me away like this." But James wasn't interested in her apologies. He had heard enough. "I'm not the one who threw us away, Charlotte. You did. Now it's over." She collapsed onto the porch, defeated. For a few moments, James felt a twinge of pity, but it quickly passed. He had given her everything, and she had destroyed it. There was no going back. James turned and walked back inside, leaving her sobbing on the front steps. As he closed the door, he felt a strange sense of peace. His marriage was over, but for the first time in months, he felt free. There would be no more lies, no more betrayal, just the quiet certainty that he had made the right decision. Charlotte's downfall was complete. She had lost everything: her marriage, her job, her lover, and her dignity. As she picked herself up from James's porch, she realized that there was no one left to turn to. The life she had built on lies had crumbled, and now she was truly alone. Liam's life continued to spiral downward. His savings were depleting fast, and the pile of rejection letters only grew taller. Desperate, he'd even reached out to old business contacts, people who used to admire him, hoping for a chance. But one by one, they turned him down, citing his tarnished reputation. His affair with Charlotte had not only destroyed his marriage, but had left him untouchable in the corporate world. Without a steady income, he had to sell his car and move into a small, shabby apartment far from the upscale neighborhood he once called home. Meanwhile, James focused on keeping life as stable as possible for his children, Evan and Olivia. His heart was still heavy with the pain of betrayal, but he knew he couldn't let that cloud his ability to be a good father. He did everything he could to make their lives feel normal again, filling the house with laughter and warmth. Evan loved basketball, so James started taking him to weekend games. Olivia, on the other hand, was into painting, and James transformed a corner of the living room into a mini art studio for her. His own happiness was still out of reach, but seeing his kids thrive gave him some comfort. Charlotte had become a shadow of the woman she once was. Her small apartment felt cold and empty, a far cry from the vibrant home she had shared with her family. She applied for jobs, but her name had been blacklisted in most professional circles. She had been labeled as the woman who destroyed her family for an affair, and it followed her everywhere. There were nights when she sat on the edge of her bed, looking at old family photos on her phone, tears falling silently. The weight of what she had done crushed her, but she knew there was no going back. James wasn't ready to forgive her, and she could feel that every time they met during their brief exchanges when she saw the kids. His eyes no longer held the softness they once had. They were hard, distant. He was civil, but only because of Evan and Olivia. Her regret was deep, but she knew James was gone from her life for good. As months passed, Sarah, Liam's ex-wife, had been slowly rebuilding her life. After filing for divorce, she had thrown herself into work and started therapy to heal from the trauma. She had been blindsided by Liam's betrayal, but over time, her pain had morphed into a quiet strength. She didn't want to be defined by what he had done to her, so she focused on herself and her future. And it was during this period that she found herself thinking more and more about James. Their shared experience of betrayal had formed a strange bond between them. They exchanged occasional text messages about the divorce proceedings, initially just updates and formalities. But as time went on, their conversations grew longer and more personal. They talked about their kids, their struggles, and how they were moving forward. Slowly, their shared pain became a bridge that connected them. One evening, James invited Sarah over for dinner. It was a casual invitation. He had made extra food and thought it would be nice to have someone to talk to. Sarah arrived, and for the first time in a long time, there was genuine laughter in James's home that wasn't just for the kids. They talked late into the night, and as the hours passed, something shifted between them. It wasn't immediate, but over time, their friendship grew into something more. They found solace in each other's company, knowing they had both endured similar betrayals. Both were hesitant at first. James was still haunted by what Charlotte had done, and Sarah was wary of opening herself up again after Liam's betrayal, but the connection they shared felt real. It was born from honesty and mutual respect. Eventually, James and Sarah began dating. It wasn't easy, given the scars they both carried, but they took it slow, focused on building trust. Sarah's 2 children from her marriage with Liam, Emma and Sam, got along well with Evan and Olivia, and their blended family started to feel like home. Meanwhile, the legal battles with their exes continued. Charlotte had been relentless in trying to get more custody of the children, arguing that she had made mistakes but was still their mother. James, however, had no intention of letting her back into their lives in any significant way. He knew that any additional involvement from her would only destabilize the peace he had worked so hard to build for the children. Liam's downfall, on the other hand, had gone even further. After losing his job, he had tried to claim that he had been wrongfully terminated. He filed a lawsuit against his former company, but the company had overwhelming evidence of his inappropriate relationship with Charlotte and how it had violated workplace policies. The lawsuit fell apart, and Liam was left with nothing. But the real turn came when James and Sarah decided to take things further legally. They gathered all the evidence they had, not just of the affair, but also of Liam's and Charlotte's attempts to manipulate the situation, their lies, and their attempts to cover it up. They worked with their lawyers to build a case, not just for full custody of the children, but to hold Liam and Charlotte accountable for the emotional distress and financial damages they had caused. The courtroom was tense. Liam and Charlotte both tried to defend their actions, but it was clear they were cornered. Their lawyers attempted to paint them as people who had simply made mistakes, but the evidence was damning. The judge wasn't sympathetic. James and Sarah's legal team presented a compelling case, showing how the affair had shattered both families, emotionally and financially. The judge ruled in their favor, awarding James full custody of Evan and Olivia, and Sarah full custody of Emma and Sam. But the trial didn't end there. James and Sarah had also filed for damages. They argued that the emotional toll of the affair had caused lasting harm, and that both Liam and Charlotte should be held financially responsible. The judge agreed. Liam and Charlotte were ordered to pay significant reparations, which neither of them could afford. It was a crushing blow for both of them. When the trial ended, Liam and Charlotte stood outside the courthouse, broken and defeated. Their lives had been shattered, not just by their own actions, but by the consequences that followed. James and Sarah walked out together, their hands intertwined, knowing that they had finally won. They had stood up for themselves, for their children, and had come out stronger on the other side. The future looked different now. James and Sarah moved forward, blending their families and creating a new life together. They raised their children with love and care, providing a stable home for all of them. The pain of the past lingered, but it no longer defined them. They had built something new from the wreckage, and in each other, they found a second chance at happiness. James and Sarah's new life together was far from ordinary. After the trial, their families blended into a somewhat peaceful rhythm. Evan and Olivia had grown close to Emma and Sam, creating a bond that seemed to heal old wounds faster than anyone had anticipated. But beneath the surface of this new chapter, the past still lurked, waiting to strike back. It all started when James and Sarah decided to move into a new house together. Their combined family needed a bigger space, and they had found the perfect home just outside the city. It was a large house with plenty of room for the kids to grow and a backyard that seemed to stretch into the horizon. For the first time in years, both James and Sarah felt like they could finally breathe. But strange things started happening shortly after they moved in. One night, as James was unpacking boxes in the garage, he noticed something odd. His car alarm had gone off, but no one was near the car. He brushed it off as a malfunction and reset the alarm. The next day, Sarah found a note on their front door. It was cryptic but menacing, with just 2 words, "You'll pay." At first, they thought it was a prank. Maybe some neighborhood kids trying to scare the newcomers. But things escalated quickly. The notes kept coming, each one more threatening than the last. Someone started ringing the doorbell in the middle of the night, then disappearing before anyone could answer. Their security cameras would catch fleeting glimpses of a figure lurking around the house, but the person was always masked and impossible to identify. James and Sarah were both on edge, but they didn't want to alarm the kids. They decided to quietly hire a private investigator, Max Harper, a former detective known for solving difficult cases. Max was a grizzled, no-nonsense guy in his late 40s, with a reputation for getting results. He began his investigation, combing through the security footage, interviewing neighbors, and even looking into Liam and Charlotte's whereabouts. It wasn't long before Max uncovered something disturbing. Liam had recently been seen in town, hanging around with some unsavory characters. After losing everything in the trial, he had fallen into a deep depression, and rumors were swirling that he had gotten involved with a local criminal syndicate to make ends meet. Max had found out that Liam was in debt, deep debt, the kind of debt that you didn't get out of easily. It became clear that Liam wasn't just angry about losing his career and marriage. He was desperate. Max also discovered that Charlotte, though still broken from the fallout of the affair, had started visiting Liam again. They weren't back together romantically, but she seemed to be caught up in his mess, almost like she couldn't break free from the chaos they had created together. She had no job, no money, and Liam's dark new world was pulling her in, even against her will. Then came the first real act of violence. One evening, while Sarah was driving home with the kids, someone threw a brick through the car's windshield. The kids screamed as the glass shattered, but thankfully no one was hurt. James was furious. He had tried to keep calm through the anonymous threats and the strange happenings around the house, but now his family had been physically endangered. He immediately called Max, who told him that this was more than just intimidation. It was a message. Max started tracking Liam more closely, following his movements, and it wasn't long before he uncovered the truth. Liam had hired someone, Ryan, a local thug with a reputation for doing dirty jobs. Ryan had been tasked with terrorizing James and Sarah, making their lives miserable in the hopes that they would back down, maybe even leave town. Liam wanted revenge, but he didn't have the guts to do it himself. So he had paid Ryan to take care of things for him. Max approached James with the information. "Liam's crossed a line," he said. "This isn't just about scaring you anymore. He's getting desperate, and desperate men do stupid things. We need to be careful." James agreed, but he wasn't going to sit back and wait for Liam to make the next move. He and Sarah decided to take their own precautions. They installed more cameras, reinforced their security system, and made sure the kids were never alone. But they couldn't live in fear forever. A week later, things took a darker turn. Max discovered that Ryan wasn't just a hired thug. He had a personal vendetta against James. Years ago, James had unknowingly been involved in a business deal that led to Ryan's father losing his company. Ryan had always blamed James, even though James hadn't done anything wrong. Now, with Liam's money and influence, Ryan had the perfect opportunity to exact his own revenge. One night, Max's investigation led him to an abandoned warehouse on the outskirts of town. He had followed Ryan there after seeing him act suspiciously near James and Sarah's house. When Max arrived, he overheard Ryan and Liam arguing. Liam was losing control. He wanted to back out, but Ryan wasn't letting him. Ryan wanted blood, James's blood, and he was willing to do whatever it took to get it. Max called James, urging him to get his family out of the house immediately. "You're not safe," he warned. "Ryan's planning something big." James didn't hesitate. He gathered Sarah and the kids and rushed them out of the house. They stayed at a hotel that night, under Max's watchful eye, but the feeling of safety was fleeting. They knew that as long as Liam and Ryan were out there, they weren't truly safe. The next morning, Max discovered that their house had been broken into. The place was ransacked, furniture overturned, and family photos shattered. But it wasn't just a burglary. There were messages spray-painted on the walls. "You can't hide, and we will find you," were scrawled in blood-red paint across the living room walls. It was clear that Ryan was escalating, and fast. That afternoon, Max came to James with a plan. "We can't keep running," Max said. "We need to confront this head-on. I've been looking into Ryan's history, and I think I've found a way to trap him." Max explained that Ryan had a history of violence, and there were old warrants out for his arrest. If they could lure him into making a move, Max could get the authorities involved and put him behind bars for good. But it was risky. James agreed to the plan. That evening, Max and James set up a trap, baiting Ryan by letting him believe that James and Sarah had returned to the house. Max had wired the house with cameras and set up a police sting, waiting for Ryan to take the bait. It didn't take long. Just after midnight, Ryan broke into the house again, this time armed with a gun. He was shouting James's name, taunting him, but what he didn't know was that the police were already waiting outside. As soon as Ryan entered the house, they moved in, surrounding him. There was a brief standoff, but Ryan, realizing he was cornered, eventually surrendered. Liam was arrested the next day, charged with conspiracy and hiring Ryan to carry out the attacks. The trial that followed was long and grueling. Liam's defense tried to paint him as a man who had been manipulated by Ryan, but the evidence was overwhelming. The texts, the bank transfers, the threats, it all pointed back to Liam. Charlotte, who had been dragged into the mess, testified against him, admitting that she had been present during several of his meetings with Ryan, but claimed she had been too scared to stop it. During the trial, James and Sarah sat together, watching as their exes faced the consequences of their actions. It was a surreal moment for both of them. They had been through so much pain and betrayal, and now, finally, they were seeing justice served. In the end, both Liam and Ryan were sentenced to long prison terms. Charlotte, though spared jail time, was left completely alone, her life in ruins. James and Sarah walked out of the courthouse that day with a sense of closure. The threats were over, and they could finally move forward. Their lives didn't go back to normal immediately, but they found a new kind of peace. Together, they rebuilt their home, focusing on raising their children in a safe, loving environment. They had been through hell and back, but in the end, they had each other. And that was enough.